So as per the speaking format, I welcome everyone. And from the SOCHM, we have Mr. Subhash Agarwal speaking to us. So Mr. Subhash Agarwal, we would like you to start the event, and then you can hand over the mic to the chairman of the session and chairman of the Shadow Monetary Policy, Dr. Arvind Virmani. Subhashji, we can't hear you. No, we can't hear you. Rajesh, can you just ensure that he's Rajesh, Dr. Rajesh, can you ensure that I hope the
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Subhash Agarwalji, we can't hear. सबको म्यूट किया होगा.
I think all of us are put on mute. That's why we can't hear him.
Yeah, I think representation. Let me just then welcome everybody to the special session of the ASSOCHAM Agro meeting. This is the Agro Shadow Monetary Policy Committee, which meets almost every 2 months, a week before the main Reserve Bank of India's Monetary Policy Committee. I welcome each one of you on behalf of the ASSOCHAM, as well as on behalf of the group, the panel, as well as the participants who have joined. This time, because it's a digital platform, we have large number of participants who have joined, and I'm going to request the chairman of the Shadow Monetary Policy Committee, Dr. Virmani, who will take over the proceedings immediately to allow Mr. Raman Agarwal at the end who wants to talk something specifically on non-banking finance companies. And then if there are questions for the panelists, I'll be able to read them to the chairman, and then chairman can decide how to address them. So with this, once again welcoming everybody and requesting Dr. Arvind Virmani to take over and start the proceedings. Thank you. Rajesh, you will have to unmute Dr. Arvind Virmani.
Someone is saying they couldn't hear you very well, Sharon.
Oh,
Just increase your volume or something.
yeah. Rajesh, can you kindly unmute Dr. Virmani?
वो चरण सिंह जी नीचे म्यूट अनम्यूट करके लिखा था, उधर करने का अरविंद विरमानी को. नरेंद्र बात करते हैं, इधर ही है, वो नीचे में है.
Okay,
स्क्रीन
Virmani,
में.
sir, you just unmute.
Yes, sir. Done, sir. Okay, so as usual, what I will do is to set a little bit of the background of the economy, and then call on our experts to give their views on the monetary policy. So, doing is to get some idea of where we are. Of course, data for Q1 is out, and some IIP data up to June is there, and it does give us a picture which I very briefly want to put before our listeners to give an idea of where the and then of course Pashma will be the first speaker, and so on as usual. So when we look at the Q1 data, what I do is I have a simple metric is that one takes the GDP as revealed in Q1 and divides it by the ratio of GDP in Q1 of last year. And I assume that normalization, we will define normalization as 1. So if we are more or less plus or minus 1 on any indicator, then according to that indicator, we are normalized. So we have a lockdown period where the whole everything except essential commodities was shut down, and then we are passing through a transition, which of course nobody really knows when will be normal, but that's how I define normal, and it gives us an indicator of where we are in the transition. So if you look at the GDP numbers, it is clear that the biggest hit was taken by construction, because that indicator, that ratio is 0.5 for construction. Next come trade, hotels, restaurants, communication and broadcasting, which is 0.53. Now you should remember here, this is a mix. Much of trade, transport and hotels was shut down, but communication and broadcasting was considered mostly a essential service because all of us had internet, we were all listening to TV, etc. But despite that, I guess the weight of this essential commodity part is so small that this was the second biggest sufferer. And then manufacturing as a whole was a little better because obviously food and all, and which I'll have a very quick, I'll give you from the IIP the details of some of this. But mining.
I need to on the call.
Hello?
This is good. Dedicated. Hello, John. Yeah, put the video on the answer.
Somebody should be muted. I don't know. Who is that? So manufacturing is at 0.6. And if you take the overall GDP, that ratio is 0.77. So basically these three sectors of the economy were doing worse during the Q1, which is largely lockdown. Sorry, I should have said that roughly April was lockdown, and then we are phasing out of the lockdown in the rest of the quarter. So the average for the whole GDP is 0.77. So the ones which were clearly doing better, and this was in our eGrow paper. For those who haven't seen it, you should look at the paper, comprehensive paper we did on this. And public administration and defense, electricity, gas, water at 0.9, 0.93, and agriculture and allied at 1. That means that these were normal sectors. Now, if we go to the IIP, what we find is very interesting that there's some disturbance. Okay, disturbance is gone. Sorry, I forgot to mention mining, which was exactly at 0.77. And my guess is that because this was out there in the rural area, some of the mines were functioning. So even though in principle it was all supposed to be shut down, but apparently people went on functioning because, really there is no probably society or police or anything nearby, so that the mines kept functioning. Anyway, now the first interesting thing you find is that if you look at the IIP for mining, electricity and manufacturing, that ratio of IIP, the same ratio, Q1 average to Q1 of last year is more or less the same as that in GDP. Being interrupted, I'm afraid. But anyway, so it's useful to look at the thing, and very quickly, what I want to tell you is the contrast, kind of an indicative numbers, because here we have also April, May, June. So I'll just tell you the sectors or subset industries which have suffered the most. Just goes from about 0.46, 0.5, 0.5 to 0.6. And at the other extreme, you have pharmaceuticals, tobacco products, chemicals, wood products, and food products, which are like going backwards 1.35, 1.04, 0.98, 0.97, 0.97. So these are more or less normal. In fact, for obvious reasons, food products where agriculture is doing well is actually 35% higher than in the corresponding June of last year. Okay, so that kind of gives you a picture. One has the and just to conclude this part of it, and then I'm going to give you a few more interesting statistics, which would be a useful background. If we look at the subsectors, so to say, clearly the capital goods, which everybody expected, and consumer durables are the worst at 0.63 and 0.65. And on the other hand, the consumer non-durables are doing pretty well. They are at 1.14. So that's kind of the broad picture of industry and GDP, which is useful to keep in mind. Very quickly, let me tell you, give you two other interesting statistics. One of them is on the unemployment rate. So I make the same index for the unemployment rate as measured by the CMIE, which I found generally to give us a good indication of trends, and it is useful for this purpose. I do the same thing. I do month by month. And what you find is that we were normal in February 20, before the pandemic. It was more or less normal at 1.1. So 1.1 means it was actually better than the period last year in February. Okay, so unemployment can be taken as normal. Then as you go towards the start of the pandemic, unemployment index rises to 1.3. In April, it goes to 3.2, and in May to 3.3. That is the height of the pandemic. At the lockdown, it jumps to 3 times the unemployment rate the previous year. And then by June, it's already down to 0.4. Okay, it was in March. And most amazingly for me, when I saw it, in July and August, it is already normal at 1%, at 1. Okay, so this is quite incredible, despite all the one hears on TV. If you go by this index, and I'll tell you the caveat to this, unemployment rate is already normal. Well, there is a caveat, and that's the interesting one, is that the labor force participation rate in July and August, that same time, is 2% point higher than the average rate last year. But there's an interesting story behind that also, that most of this is because of it's very to do with self-employed. It has something to do with labor, but it has a lot and the greatest amount to do with formal labor. Another interesting related fact is that the increase in unemployment rate is highest in Haryana, which you think of as Faridabad areas, and the same reason is connected. It is the organized who are likely, I'm just guessing here, more educated and more aware of the pandemic, are more taking an estimate that they don't want to. They have enough capacity to last up, so they have withdrawn from the labor force and they are not going in and taking the risk of pandemic. So that's one interpretation which is consistent with all this data. Let me end with that, and I'm sure members of the panel will tell you much more of the inflation rate, etc., and of course link it to the monetary policy issue. So with that, let me start with Professor Ashima Goel.
Thank you, everyone. So we got a very good overview of the economy's performance. I'd just like to add a couple of Internationally, there was a huge uproar that India has done the worst, but among major economies. But recently, there's some data come out on South Africa, which shows, they had a lockdown for 6 months. They've just come out of it. Their lockdown started on March 27th. So they had a lockdown all 3 months of the quarter. And their GDP, the fall in their GDP in that quarter is 51%, while our quarter-on-quarter fall is 29%. So the point I want to make is that when you have a really strict lockdown and all except essential activities shut down, you expect a large fall. But in the Indian case, there was very rapid catch up in June. So we thought that it would make up. But then because of the migrant return and the spread of the virus all over the country, states imposed arbitrary lockdown. So there was a plateauing in this catch up. It did not happen fully. And but now I think under Unlock 4, there's a specific guideline that states should not disrupt interstate movement so that supply chains are not interrupted and the supply side can recover. But I think the Unlock 4 went too far in terms of allowing individual liberties, and there's generally COVID fatigue. So there were we saw a resurgence, what we call the second peak. So in Mumbai, for example, on 17th September, this was midnight, they imposed section 144. That is that more than 5 people can't gather, you need permits, etc. So again, the point I want to make is that we are moving towards a granular adjustment of lockdowns where you ensure supply side chains are not disrupted, they can function. And at the same time, over interaction, large crowds, which can spread the virus, are restrained. So these kind of, I'm hopeful that we'll see. And so some of the latest high frequency data, analysts show a range of 80 to 100, in terms of catch up of mobility index. Even hotels are reporting, in Lonavala is 25% occupancy. There's a 40% rise in demand for electronics in August. So I'm hopeful that we'll see more recovery in the next quarter. Now, coming to the monetary policy and inflation, since CPI is still above 6, above the RBI's range, and then WPI is much lower, so that gap is there. But when you study the reason for this gap, it's largely due to food. The food components are much higher in CPI than they are in WPI, suggesting that it's due to these supply chain disruptions and retail in markets. So that is likely to be temporary. And then in September, we've had very heavy rain, so that also affects vegetable prices. Again, that is temporary and is expected to fall. So for monetary policy, since we are in an inflation targeting regime and there is a lot of uncertainty, again, my prescription would be pause until we see this inflation coming down in December. It should come down. But the communication should be very clear that this is a temporary pause. There's room for more adjustment, that they remain accommodative. And also something extra, because now since the virus is not being contained and it's likely to persist for a few months, the communication should also be that they will be accommodative as long as it's necessary to return to normalcy. They will support growth, etc. For example, the Fed has given a 3 years guidance. But the other issue with this gap, wholesale price inflation being low means the real interest rate facing industry is high. CPI inflation being high means that consumers, depositors are facing negative real interest rates. So, in the ECB, they're trying a very interesting experiment. I think we are also doing something like that, which is that it's called a dual interest rate policy. So since they are at the zero bound, they can't cut. We are inflation targeting higher inflation, we can't cut. But what this Reserve Bank has also been doing is using TLTRO to support lower interest loans, as well as a tiered reserve policy to support banks in giving conditional. But the trick is you doing it conditional on giving higher deposit rates. So this is regarded as a way for unlimited sort of monetary support. And maybe we can explore it also, the conditional part. And then moreover, liquidity has to be maintained in surplus to reduce spreads. Other ways of reducing spreads, we've seen in the last couple of months, GSEC rates has been quite volatile. And But the RBI has clearly indicated support when it reaches 6% through OMOs, etc. Maybe some sort of announcement, because now we should see rising government borrowing since they've already more or less used up their earlier announced borrowing, and the state governments will be coming in. So some kind of COVID-19 bonds or some sort of announcement might help. Another thing they could do would be to share data on, there's a lot of uncertainty about restructuring. What is the percentage of loans affected? So if data on this is shared, it might help to calm markets, because we have estimates ranging from 5 to 40%. So what are the real numbers like? Then the other issue is the large portfolio inflows and already liquidity when you have a current account surplus. So in the literature, there's discussion of the quadrilemma, that emerging markets face this problem. And that exchange rate adjustment, RBI said it is happy to let the exchange rate appreciate somewhat. There is room for some appreciation, but too much of appreciation will hurt exports. So other instruments also have to be used. And earlier they used to have this idea of a line, capital account liberalization. When you need to encourage more inflows, you open out more. When you need to discourage, you retreat a bit. I don't know if we still have that room, but a lot of countries are using macroprudential market-based controls. For example, Indonesia lengthened debt maturity after the GFC. There are limits on banks' net open FX position. So maybe some exploration of macroprudential, other kinds of capital controls to reduce the pressure on liquidity. You don't want too much liquidity. And if to the extent the central bank is buying foreign exchange and investing in US G-SECs, they can't buy our government G-SECs. They can't support domestic borrowing program because liquidity is high. So those are the issues I wanted to raise. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Goyal. Before I move on to Indranil Sengupta, let me just add a few things which the gap between CPI and CPI has gone by roughly 10.4% and WPI by 4%. And if you look at the ratio, which I can compare historical numbers, the ratio is the highest one has seen for 5 to 10 years. So clearly it's the gap, and it's probably due to logistic and supply chain disruptions, which I would expect that over time they would get resolved and the gap would be reduced. So that is one issue which will come in the MPC or the RBI forecasting, and I'm sure Upasana and others and Mr. Gupta will tell us a little bit more on what their forecasts are. And the second point I want to highlight is capital inflows. Actually, I had a paper which Oshima's journal, she's the editor, was published my last paper before I left the government, actually, on this issue, by the way, which linked it to monetary policy and fiscal, but I won't bore you with that. But what I do want to point out is that given the reforms which are really gathering pace, which I'm very happy to see, with the labor reforms now, 4 codes passed, the agriculture reforms passed, I would expect that the pace of FDI will actually pick up considerably from the second half of this fiscal year. So the RBI is going to have to focus on the issue of capital inflows. As I said, in that paper, I can't remember the exact reference. I think it was 2009. But if Oshima remembers, maybe she can tell us that later on. But the issue is certainly going to be on the RBI. Let me call, as I mentioned, Indranil. I don't see you. Oh, there you are. Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Indranil Sengupta. Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
So I go with what they call a out of box 15 basis point cut in the policy. Three reasons why. Number one, we are looking at a 7.5% contraction in GDP growth. I recently commissioned a survey on the Indian economy last week, and the results are pretty grim. 19% said that they had lost jobs. Only 14% said that they are not seeing any downside pressures on either their income or their employment. If you look at discretionary demand, everybody seems to be pushing back. It could be 50% plus for jewelry. It is 40s for fridges, ACs, white goods. For cars, two-wheelers, it's in the 30s. So what is happening is that the COVID outbreak, which became a supply shock because obviously we shut down the economy to prevent spread, is now fast progressing into a very severe demand shock because of lost incomes, because of lost jobs. So from that perspective, we think that the one response that you can get, at least from the RBI, is to cut rates. Of course, the government has to back with demand side measures, but then that is not the focus of this policy. Coming to inflation, in fact, it was Dr. Virmani who pointed this out in the last policy, and I checked. The sole source of inflation is this supply side issue, which is driving a wedge between WPI food and CPI food. It had gone up to 6.5%. It's now 5%. So it's 150 basis points of CPI inflation. Now, when you look forward, and after all, monetary policy should not be rear mirror driving. It has to look forward. When you look forward, you see the base going from 3% odd to 7% odd. You see the rains. You see the fact that imported inflation is virtually non-existent. Oil prices are lower. The rupee is now at the RBI to call. RBI now has almost $550 billion of FX reserves, and the market will let the RBI choose whatever level of the rupee it deems fit. So the fiscal deficit, you can say, yeah, it could be 5 percentage points higher than maybe the long run average. Maybe it goes to 7.5. Long run average is 4.5. That's actually 300 basis points. Your growth is 1,500 basis points lower or thereabouts. If you say the potential growth is 7 odd and you are going to record minus 7.5. So when your potential growth is, you are 1,500 basis points lower than your potential growth, where is the question of inflation? The only source of inflation could have been money supply growth and the surplus liquidity that is there in the system. But with the HTM maturity hike, you are going to see about 4 lakh crore of this surplus liquidity going into G-Secs because, now you no longer bother about a MTM hit. So therefore, whichever way you see it, inflation will come down as we go forward. The problem is that the busy season is starting. Now you can wait till December, but if you go and cut rates in December, this year is gone. At the peak of the COVID outbreak, when the economy is facing the biggest stress, you will not have cut interest rates before the busy season. And the thing is that, earlier you could say that, okay, I'm giving liquidity, so interest rates should come down. But now you have linked the MCLR to the RBI repo rate. So unless you reduce the RBI repo rate, the MCLR is not going to come down. It's because it's now a policy link rate. Earlier, the view was that, liquidity is tight, we are cutting rates, so we link the lending rate to the policy rate. Now giving liquidity is not going to help because banks will say the policy rate has not come down, so why should I cut rates? So therefore, my take is that the economy is very, very weak. A situation where 19% people say they have lost jobs, and And all of us are looking at contraction, I think, all the way till December. So, and I think my 7.5% is among the brighter ones in the street. So clearly there is stress on the economy. If you look at inflation as an economist, it is hard to argue that inflation can be a problem for the next 6 months. So therefore, we think that number one, the RBI should come out with a 15 basis point cut at least in this policy. That is number one. Number two, there should be a OMO calendar because, right now, given that you have raised HTM maturity limits, banks can buy G-Secs. But there is this fear that, if you look at the borrowing program, even at the current level of the fiscal deficit, the current level of fiscal stimulus, which is just 1.3% of GDP, you are seeing a situation where the government will probably have to borrow 7-8 lakh crore more in the second half of the year. And then, if you do more fiscal stimulus, if the Maharishi committee comes and says that you have to write loan moratoria, then it can be even more. Like I said, that the market can buy 4 lakh crore. It has no visibility what is going to happen beyond the 4 lakh crore. So if the RBI were to give a OMO calendar, then it can sequence that first the market uses the surplus in the money market and buys the 4 lakh crore, and then the RBI comes and picks up whatever else there is. So that will also reduce the the reserve money creation right from now, because otherwise the market will keep forcing the RBI to do OMO, because it will say that I don't have 8 lakh crore to fund, so you have to come in. So from this policy, I will say that I would expect two things. One is a 15 basis point cut, which Governor Das called out of the box, and at least a RBI OMO calendar. It need not be a calendar for each month, just a firm indication that we are there at the back to do OMO. I think should be sufficient. The one final point I will make is, see, this year, it's not just COVID and, the fact that interest rates are still relatively high, as Dr. Ashima Goel mentioned. This year is also unique because it has two Malmas. So there was already one earlier, and now there is a second one, just at a time when the economy is getting out of the most, the deepest hole that it's ever been. Consumption is going to be muted all the way till middle of October. And then festival demand is also going to be weak this year. In most cases, you will see, Bombay Ganpati was very muted. Durga Puja, as far as I can see, is going to be a E-Puja here. Diwali will be muted. So the festival demand will also be muted. So any which way you cut it, clearly demand is going to be weak. And therefore, there needs to be some support from the RBI through lower rates. Stop.
Okay, thank you. Before I move to Upasana, just a few 2 points I want to emphasize. One, I think very important, something we have forgotten, that really monetary policy is about future inflation. So as Indranil has quite rightly emphasized, that really because there was so much uncertainty, we could say, okay, we have to be a little cautious. But I think the time is coming when even the RBI and everybody else has to now start looking forward and see what is the future inflation, and given the lags, that is what the monetary policy has to be directed at. The second one, which I think, as Indranil pointed out, I had agreed with many others also, and given a specific reason that from all accounts, how inflation could persist at these high levels and will not come down. In fact, even now there is already talk coming that there may be another agricultural boom, and compared to that, we may again, kind of crash prices in certain commodities. So really, and of course the base effect, but that is one point. The other point, the data I just gave the CMI data, but if you look at the GDP, clearly, with a 23%, when I gave that 0.77, which is 23% decline in the overall GDP, a 19% loss in jobs is quite consistent with that. And given our own and the non-essential commodity economy actually has a lesser proportion of jobs than the GDP numbers. We get minus 15% difference, but the exact number nobody knows. Clearly, there would be a job loss which is somewhat lower than that is what is very consistent. Okay, so let's turn now to Upasana Bhardwaj ji. I hope you're going to give us a little more detail on which you usually do on the inflation part of it, because I think all of us have been a little skimpy on that details on the latest data.
Yeah, sure. So I think inflation, if we look at, I would totally agree as to the fact that, as a central bank, they should be forward looking, number one. So their projections, how they stand 1 year down the line is more important than what the numbers today are. And to be fair, their actions in the past have been in those directions. Because if you recall, the easing that happened earlier was in anticipation that second half of the year is going to be much more benign. So that is what they have done. And similarly, so what we are also looking at a much more, lower readings as we go ahead for CPI inflation at this point in time. Food inflation is likely to come down. Having said that, core inflation is still seeming to be quite sticky. So if we were to look at the internals, I think the second half of the year seems to be more in the 5.5–6% range in terms of core inflation. But because food inflation, the supply side disruptions are expected to ease out, and there's also a favorable base effect, that is likely to bring down the headline inflation below 4% in the months of November and December for sure. It could be closer to 3.5% or closer to 4%, but a sub 4% reading seems quite a bit consensus, I think, in the market as well. Largely because last year these numbers were extremely high. So I think that is how the CPI trajectory is expected to be. And then it slightly moderates towards 4.5 or so as we approach the end of the year. That's how it appears like. Now, there was also a talk about WPI and CPI deviation that we're talking about. But if we see, I think one is CPI narrowing lower. And the other is also somewhere WPI, we are expecting that to move up into positive, which we've already seen one reading, which is into positive territory. And it will also normalize little higher. So I think that gap, like you suggested earlier, is going to narrow and become much more congenial in between somewhere. So I don't think that will become a bigger challenge. The widening gap will definitely narrow going ahead in the next few months. And also the pickup in WPI inflation that happened in the recent reading was not because of food. It happened because of core inflation. The basic metals and all had surged. So, that is the reason why we saw an uptick. So if we look at the details, that's how it appears like it's a core inflation of manufacturing side that is actually picking up slightly. So somewhere that pass-through is happening in the WPI, and hence I think the narrowing of the gap will happen. So yes, inflation trajectory remains uncertain, of course, but the RBI should become so it's like we have to be very clear as to what RBI thinks and how they communicate to the market. I think that is more important. Just like the developed central banks, they have easily communicated their higher tolerance for higher inflation. And that is something which we need to be very sure. So when we are giving a higher weightage to growth, that right now growth is a worry, let's live with a little bit higher inflation if that was the case, even if that was the case. In the near term, let's focus on inflation, on growth. However, what happens is if we recall the August MPC minutes that happened after the August meeting, suddenly there was a very ugly turn of events, I would say, because each of the members had highlighted inflation as a big risk going ahead. And the whole document was full of only inflationary risks. That's where there was a turn in the views within the market, and somewhere markets gets jittery, when we see such kind of conflicting views coming from the policymakers. So for me, when I look at each of these statements or the speeches, it is important that we get a very consistent view, at least in the foreseeable future, that we are going to be looking at growth. We will try and support growth. Having said that, I don't see a rate cut in this policy. The reason is that right now I don't see a need for it. While I agree that we will be entering into a festive season, a little pickup in industrial activity period and all, but there is also extremely weak demand which is there. And in this uncertain environment of growth, I don't see a 15 basis or a 25 basis of a rate cut really stimulating demand. So they would rather pause for a while, wait for some stability, and then see if we can act. Because we need to keep one thing in mind clearly, that some policy headroom should be there if the crisis, because it's a disease, it's a problem which nobody knows how it's going to pan out further in the absence of vaccine. So how it pans out is important. So I don't think we should go for a rate cut right now. It may be a wasted tool. That's what I believe. So we should probably pause for a while and then go ahead. For growth, in fact, I would say I'm much more bearish than Indranil. I'm looking at minus 11.5% for the full year. Despite that, I say that we should probably hold on to our guns right now. And as we progress on inflation, and as we progress on how the sequential pickup in economy is happening, we should support the economy required. The second part is on the liquidity side for sure. There should be consistently, again, so it's communication again without passing mixed signals. So if we see how RBI has been since April and May, they were doing, we know about Operation Twist for sure. So what they did was they actually did a liquidity infusion, because they first bought treasury bills and then they did an Operation Twist. So it was net liquidity infusion. Had they just simply done a clean operation of OMO purchase, it would have been much more effective in the market. So what I'm trying to arrive at is, there are times when we get a lot of conflicting signals, mixed signals from RBI, which has to be avoided. We can do away with very hawkish comments on inflation for the time being. We can do away, or rather we should get better clarity on how they really perceive growth. As of now, RBI has not come out with a growth estimate. We should know what they are looking at, how things are. So some kind of clarity is necessary. The other aspect is, I think there's some kind of a fascination for trying to avoid a steepening of the yield curve. So basically, the entire bandwidth of RBI goes into trying to control the tenure and try to keep the tenure yield lower. I think there is there's a necessity right now to try and focus on across the curve, because and more so on the shorter end of the curve. So when we do Operation Twist, for example, which luckily now, fortunately they have shifted now to OMO purchase, the first of it, which you've already seen. So hopefully they will not repeat Operation Twist, because that distorts the less than 3-year curve. And that is exactly where the cost of borrowing for the corporates is. No corporate today is borrowing long term, because there is no demand for investment. It is all up to 3 years that there's a borrowing. So what is required is that the bandwidth is spent on trying to keep the shorter end of the curve well in check, so that the cost of borrowing for the corporates is controlled. The other side is, of course, I think the ball is more, so from a monetary policy angle, it is more about communication, ensuring adequate liquidity. At this point, keeping rates steady from my side. OMOs, I would agree with. Wherever there is scope, we should be provided for with better clarity. So I would agree with Indranil what he's suggesting, that at least back to back, if we see some more OMO purchases, there would be much more confidence which will be instilled in the markets that RBI is there to support. So I think that kind of confidence is required from RBI. But more so, I would say that it is the government side, which is probably, efforts are much more awaited to provide a fillip to the economy. Less and less, I would say, from the Reserve Bank of India at this point in time. So I would really await more fiscal stimulus package from the government. We are expecting that ahead of the festive season, there will be some kind of announcement. And just one point I would say, the government is right now not spending as much. They are sitting with nearly 2.5 to 3 lakh crore of cash balances with RBI. So that is the surplus they are sitting with, and they have been spending relatively, as in states are in WMA with RBI. That means they are borrowing from RBI, but the central government is sitting with decent amount of cash balances with RBI. I think this is also detrimental to growth at this point in time. We need more spending by the government, so they should front load it, whatever possibility, and maybe curb the spending if required in the last quarter of the year. So at this point, that cash balance which is there should be spent by the government. Maybe they were awaiting the festive season where the stimulus could be announced and they will utilize that money there. So that has to be coming into the market, into the system, in the economy. Otherwise, the government-led support will, if it's not there, then economy will remain more fragile than required. Okay, Dr. Veermani, we can't hear you.
Yeah, so thank you. Yeah, let me just point to two things which struck me. One is, of course, that kind of following up on also what Ashima said on forward guidance, etc. You are adding that perhaps the messaging is unclear and the guidance and much greater clarity is needed to avoid kind of creating more uncertainty. Now, I would guess part of that was because the MPC was coming to an end. And I think MPC members who were going to go away or were expecting to not be there were trying to put down some kind of a view of their past on the thing, which creates confusion because they're not really thinking about the future in a way because they're not going to be there. So perhaps that was the reason. I'm just guessing. The second one, I think the interesting point you made that government is sitting on cash, but I haven't looked at it. Consistent with earlier ones, I don't know. I presume your implication is that it's much more than normal, and therefore, yes, if that would be an issue. But of course, it could be otherwise also.
Yeah. So this is a normal. Yeah. If I can just. Just quickly, that basically in this kind of an environment where government stimulus is required, government spending is required, this level of cash surplus is something which I'm saying is not needed at this point. In the second half of the year, typically they should build up.
I got it.
Can I just ask a quick question to Upasana?
Yeah, I think a little bit. So Ashima, go ahead. We can have a little bit of discussion. The members.
No, I was just wondering, as you were saying, since it's the last meeting of the MPC, why did the market give so much importance to members' views? They should give more importance to the governor's statement. In any case, there's a hierarchy in communication.
No, but
what the governor says is more important. Now, members, they're not going to be there and they have different views. In any case, there's divergence.
No, I think, ma'am, the reason is because it was the other two RBI members also. It is not just about the external members. I think more importantly, we should keep in mind Dr. Patra was extremely hawkish to the extent that he said we will have to reverse. He also went, it depends on what he's trying to arrive at is different, but he was stating a fact that if we were to stick and abide by the mandate given to me, I will have to reverse my stance if inflation does not subside. So that is there. Plus, of course, we have Mridul Sagar. Mridul Sagar was also equally hawkish. So it is not just about the governor, or rather not just about the external members. It was also about the other two members.
Right. That's a good point. Indranil, you want to add anything or should we move on? Or we can come back to the other issues. Okay, so let me call. I think we don't have any more of our regular members. Can go to Mr. Agarwal.
So I have a few points to make.
Oh yeah, sorry, I forgot you. Yeah, of course, Karen. Hey, your turn. Sorry.
I'm playing the double hat, the SOCHEM as well.
Yeah. Right. My mistake.
So let me first say that we have had a beautiful discussion until now, and the issues that have been raised by the panelists before me on inflation are absolutely well taken. But I still hold on to the view that yes, and this is where I totally agree with Indranil, that the expected inflation is expected to be much lower in the days to, given both the situation, especially the demand side story, which Indranil articulated it so well. Now, given the situation and given what Dr. Virmani had said right in the beginning about IIP and if you look at the data of the 8 core industries, almost every industry is down in the 8 core industry and dramatically and as expected, except of course fertilizer. But if you look at the monthly index over June, yes, there is some improvement in July, except coal and cement. But then, of course, things are beginning to look up. And I would say July and August and September, things would have certainly looked up still better. Now, the points that I want to bring on the table are pertaining to the non-performing assets and the expectation that they're going to deteriorate in the days to come. Now, different estimates, especially from the RBI, the non-performing public sector banks are expected to rise to 15.2% by March end 2021. And in the private sector banks, they're going to increase to 7.3% from 4.2%. And in foreign banks, 3.9% from 2.3% right now. As expected, and we all knew that there's a stress in the economy and this is going to get transmitted onto the balance sheet of the commercial banks. As far as the overall capital adequacy ratios are concerned, there's going to be some difficulty there, and the capital adequacy is going to fall from 14.6% to 13.3%. As expected, this could deteriorate further because the earlier assumption was that COVID would be probably a 3-month or a 4-month phenomenon. But as we all know that this is relapsing, and there's this in advanced countries, the probability of relock is also emerging. So nobody knows. There's so much of uncertainty onto what the economy is going to do and where the stress levels will be and how will it get reflected onto the balance sheet of the commercial banks. Now, the market perception and of the Reserve Bank, the perception is that the COVID can create NPAs to the extent of 4 to 7 lakh crore, which is a large amount. Now, I'm not going to dwell a lot on NBFCs because for NBFCs, we have requested Mr. Raman Agrawal to specially come and speak. But broadly, I would like to say that there is expected to be stress level at NBFCs level also. And the worry is that they may also be below the regulatory capital requirement. Now, over the last few months, liquidity has been taken care of. We all know about it. The relapse is coming. The fear is, how are we going to, if ever there's a relapse, how are we going to handle it? Now, this is where my view is, and this is where I would agree and connect with Upasana so well, that in this situation, the fiscal authority will have to play a very important role. And maybe the monetary authority will have to play a supportive role now. And in this supportive role, maybe the monetary authority will have to think of various aspects, some of which I'm going to articulate in the next few minutes. But before that, if the fiscal authority has to take the heavy duty job now, I think the time has come to literally consider monetization of the deficit, which so far has been resisted or not been done. And I do not know the reasons why. Maybe they're keeping the powder dry, as once was mentioned by Professor Goel, that maybe they're keeping their powder dry, but that was at a time when we were still much away. Now, when we are in the midst of the crisis, the unemployment levels, as we know, the survey which Indranil was referring is, of course, the feeling when you get into the market and talk to people. So therefore, I think if the fiscal authority has to play the uplifting role which is required now, monetization of deficit is one way. That's not being done. The other issue that I want to bring to the table, and I was very influenced by the FOMC meet of September 16. This is where I think the biggest problem is coming, the certainty. The monetary policy has to bring in certainty as to how accommodative they will be and continue to be accommodative. The very fact that one or two members of the MPC say that they may have to reverse or they may have to change their stance is extremely damaging for the economy. This is exactly what the Americans have done. Till 2023, they have almost assured that we will not be moving our interest rates. They have done the projections themselves. Unfortunately, the Reserve Bank has yet not come out with any projections, but the FOMC and the Americans have come out with the projection till 2023, and they've done different projections and almost assured the market that we assure you that this low rate of interest will continue. Now that is where the market then benefits tremendously. They know that, okay, the monetary authority is not only accommodative right now, but is also assuring us a very accommodative policy for the next 3 years. That goes a long way in taking decisions and also keeping in mind the transmission mechanism lags. The economy has to recover from the wounds that have just been inflicted on it. And now in that recovery, now they know that there is total commitment from the authorities not to play with the interest rate. Keeping this in mind, I'm also of the view that 50 basis point reduction right now and a singular accommodative policy stance with clarity that until we come into the positive growth zone, we are not going to tamper or reverse our stance. We may go accommodative further, exactly on the lines of FOMC saying that these are the projections until we come to our normal employment and normal inflation and normal output, we are not going to tamper with the rates. I think that would go a long way. And therefore, I'm totally in sync with Indranil's 50 basis point. I also think that the accommodative monetary policy just doesn't translate into interest rates. The banking industry is under stress, and therefore the regulatory requirements, the prudential requirements, and to some extent the Basel norms should also be accommodative. One understands that one cannot be profligate, one cannot deregulate, the banking entities have to be regulated, the discipline has to be maintained, but because this is once in a century thing, we will have to be accommodative so that the banks go out and start lending. Otherwise, that's exactly what they are doing. They are holding on to whatever they have and they put it under reverse repo. The last point and recommendations that I would like to make is it is high time that the reverse repo rate is revisited. The amount which is being put under reverse repo should not be there. The banks should be insisted upon to go and find green shoots in the market. As I mentioned in June, July, August, some green shoots have started appearing. Those should be identified. MSMEs is one sector which should be identified. Maybe good NBFCs is one place where the money can be put in, and we have to work in a complete system so that the revival starts right away. Finally, I would like to again conclude by saying that certainty, if we have to usher in certainty for the economic agents in the economy, and the recommendations that I've made are in those lines, I think the suggestion made by Indranil is absolutely on the track that we should have a proper calendar announced so that there is total certainty what is coming when and what sequence, what tenor and when. And that will help for the economic agents to plan in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Charan Singh. I kind of emphasize 2 points. One, of course, you just said, I think in this normal business, we are forgetting that pandemic is once in a century event, really. As our research, Charan, as our research at EGROW has shown, and we have been talking about the closest thing, which was maybe the World War or the Great Depression. Of course, very different in context, but but it's kind of puzzling that whether it is MPC or anybody else, that they are unable to say that we will stick to the mandate, which never envisaged any such thing at all. I mean, not even close. I think nobody even gave a 10% probability on an event of this side. Of course, we will have to think about all these things for the future. But I think the more imaginative banks and countries and committees are thinking, does it require seriously a different way of thinking, at least for the next 6 months or 9 months? So anyway, I'll just leave it at that. And the second point you mentioned was about the monetization of the deficit. What again puzzles me is there's no discussions on a very simple and even now writing in my Q&As is that take any kind of reasonable normal projection. Last year's GDP growth was 4%, 4.2%. Take anything between 0 and 4%, which 90% of the people would agree on, the experts, and say, okay, that's the best or the worst could have happened in a normal situation. And then take the decline, whether it's -5% or -7.5 or -10%, and the revenue implications of that, and just monetize that, because I don't see how anybody can dispute or disagree or challenge that kind of reasoning, which is totally conservative. But anyway, again, I'm not trying to push my own view, but I think that's an important issue, which perhaps we may not have time to discuss today, but if we do, we may. With that, let me move to, I think Mr. Raman Agarwal was going to speak.
Yeah.
Issue of and all that, which has been on the minds of many people. Give us whatever else you want to say. Mr. Agarwal.
Thank you, Dr. Virmani. Thank you, Professor Charan Singh, and thank you, SHM, for this opportunity. It's always so enlightening to hear the views of such experts. Coming to the NBFC perspective, let me bring in one very, should I call an unfortunate or something there, but it's a fact, is the ongoing matter in the Supreme Court on the interest on moratorium, which is now being termed as interest on interest. And now, why I bring this is because from the NBFC perspective, what we need to keep in mind is that first, when it came to moratorium, while yes, we gave moratorium to our borrowers, but getting a back-to-back moratorium on our lenders, that means the term loans from banks or financial institutions, was something which was not very easy to come by. So that was one stress situation created. Also, the new resolution framework, the one-time restructuring announced by RBI, there again clearly financial service providers are out. So that means our term loans once again cannot be restructured. So in the light of all these developments, 28th September is what we are waiting for, since the court has said that there will be no further adjournments, and perhaps what view, and they have clearly stated almost that they are on the verge of striking down what they're calling interest on interest. So what impact, we need to wait and see. And added to it is the issue of the rating downgrades, which again the court is also viewing. So these are two very important factors we need to keep in mind and wait what the court decides on 28th. Now, so let me address two more critical points, especially on the one-time restructuring, the financial resolution framework announced by RBI. From our perspective, we have highlighted two key issues here. Since this circular talks about mandatory 10% additional provisioning, I think what needs to be kept in mind is that NBFCs are today following the Ind AS norms. And as per the Ind AS and based on the ECL methods, already the provisioning are quite sufficiently higher generally to whatever provision is required under the RBI earlier prudential norms. So in that light, we feel that this 10% provisioning required is perhaps too harsh going forward, and maybe there may be a case, especially for NBFCs in the light of India's accounting, to have a relook at that. Second point is also about the eligibility of the loans, since only all standard loans, but only up to 30-day DPD is what is eligible. I think, especially in case of our borrowers, the segment which we cater to, perhaps there is a case to look at why not allow up to 90 days. That means all standard accounts as on 1st March, and not only restrict, only further put a caveat of 30 days default. So that would perhaps widen the scope and maybe help us meet the desired objective. Finally, of course, the very most important talked about issue always on the NBFC front is liquidity. Now, while yes, I agree, a lot has been done, and the previous eminent economists and experts talked about various measures, even TLTRO, etc. But the ground reality still remains, and I think let me draw clear example and evidence of this is the press release issued by Ministry of Finance on 17th August 2020, where they modified the partial credit guarantee scheme. Now, in that release, the ministry has clearly stated that only 90 NBFCs were able to raise funds under the partial credit guarantee scheme 2.0. So out of a gamut of thousands of NBFCs, only 90 NBFCs were able to raise these funds. Now, while the press release says that perhaps there is no appetite, let me bring a very critical factor here. See, when we talk of NBFCs, we've said this, that the larger universe of NBFCs are all small and medium sized. So if you look at numbers, more than 90% of the companies are small and medium sized. They do not access capital markets, meaning they do not do any issuance of bonds or NCDs or CPs. Their modes of borrowing are simple term loans from banks and institutions like SIDBI, NABARD, or the subsidiaries of NABARD, NAB Samriddhi, NAB Kisan. So it's only term loans. The moment you, and if you talk of TLTRO, or you talk of partial credit guarantee scheme, or we even talk about the special liquidity line which the ministry has set up, they all talk about banks investing in the bonds or NCDs issued. So straight away, we are keeping a large segment of NBFCs out of these schemes because they don't issue bonds. So that's one very critical factor. Number two factor is always, of course, the point of credit rating being an eligibility criteria. In all these schemes, there is a minimum level of credit rating as an eligibility criteria. If I don't have that rating, I'm ineligible to participate. So that is something we've discussed earlier also, that the rating model and scale followed by the rating agencies is the same whether you are a 5 lakh crore NBFC or you are a 50 crore NBFC. In such a scenario, the small and medium NBFCs are not able to get the prescribed ratings. So the need is to look at the other parameters like capital adequacy ratio, like the NPA levels, like the profitability, and also the promoter understanding and grasping of the market conditions. And the third issue remains on the liquidity part is the tenure. So whether it was, again, whether we talk of TLTRO, whether we talk of partial credit guarantee scheme or the special liquidity window, they all talk of providing funds for a very short tenure of 6 to 18 months only. Now, the average lending done by NBFCs is anywhere between 2 to 4 years. So the funds available have to be made available for a tenure of at least 2 to 3 years to enable NBFCs to take benefit and lend. And final issue is, of course, the risk aversion on the part of banks. So I think perhaps we need to create a fund and maybe assign an institution like SIDBI or NABARD a defined role that, yes, you need to lend this money by way of term loans to the NBFCs, also ensuring that the money flows to the smaller ones. One important factor when it comes to bank lending to NBFCs, post ILFS, since all other funding sources became very difficult, we even saw a very large number of even the larger NBFCs moved more towards bank funding. As a result, the small and medium NBFCs have been crowded out. So it means that the individual limits set up by banks for lending to NBFCs are all grabbed by the larger NBFCs. So the piece of the cake left is hardly left for the smaller ones. So the need is to perhaps create a carve out, specially like it was done under TLTRO. There was a special carve out done for small and medium NBFCs. So something of that like is required. Secondly, the arrangement of bank lending to NBFCs for on lending to priority sector is allowed only up to the 5% of the total NDTL, which is, I think there is a case to increase that in order to encourage banks to lend more to NBFCs, because this is a win-win for everybody. Banks are able to meet the PSL targets, NBFCs are able to get funding at a reasonable cost. So I think these are the few points which need to be kept in mind and which we have been talking about to the government and RBI. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess we can take questions now. Charan, are you, perhaps once you get some questions, you can read them out. And
there are a large number of questions which have come, some on my cell phone and some on the internet. Can I request, if Dr. Virmani, you permit, can I request one of them who has asked more questions to directly ask?
Yeah, please.
Mr. Narendra, if you don't mind, just be brief because of time. Can you directly ask your question?
Yeah. Thank you, Charan Singh ji and Virmani ji, Arvind Virmani. That there have been a very good discussion. Of course, one or two issues. One is on the interest rate. Recently, of course, the banks, public sector banks have passed on the interest rates better than the private sector banks. That has come in the paper. But recently, of course, SBI chairman has also said that the demand for credit is not up to the mark. Second is the investments are not growing, even though the interest rates have been brought down. So in this connection, that how this rate of interest reduction, that repo rate reduction, how that is going to help currently when the entire what you call investment situation or the demand for credit is lower. Second is in relation to another area, that these forex reserves are substantially more than 500 billion or even 541 billion. So there was one suggestion whether these forex reserves could be taken up for a part of that for infrastructure or such investment which can create demand more. And the third area, of course, is this interest rate reduction has really brought down the, recently RBI governor has said that the market, that borrowing of the bonds as well as commercial paper, all that has come down. And of course, the 10-year yield has had come down, but substantially. But recently, there is a fear of state government and central government borrowing, which amounts to hardly around, I think, more than 20 lakh crores, and the fiscal deficit. So, but the savers in the inflation scenario, what we are talking, they are not getting positive return. So how are we being in India is most of the savings country? How are we taking care of the interest of the depositors? Because I saw quite a lot of you are very bullish that we have to reduce the interest rate and all. Of course, from the growth point of view, that also the fact, like Charan Singh Saab has said, that the next 3 years should be accommodative policy. And once we come back to the growth, it will definitely help in again getting the parallel benefit to everybody, every stakeholder.
Yeah. Okay.
This
yeah.
is the,
good.
yeah.
Good
Yes.
question. Thank you.
Yeah.
So let me start off the reply, and then I'll ask the others.
Can I make a
Firstly,
suggestion? Can I make a suggestion, please?
Yeah.
There are so many questions. Can I ask 3 more people to ask questions, and then we'll seal it, and then you take the answers?
Well, from the next question, we'll do that. Let me just start off the thing. So the first question I take up is the issue of demand for capital. You said low. Now, if you look at the data which I have just presented to you, the two worst sufferers, it's clear from the IIP, is capital goods and consumer durables. I gave you some numbers earlier. Now, when you talk about capital goods, just thinking logical economics, if the consumer demand is low and the capacity utilization for certain sectors fell to 60% or lower, I mean, it would be kind of very imaginative to expect that you will get an increase in capital expenditures and investment by those sectors. So really, when we are talking about the investment part of it, we really have to focus on the government of India and if possible, the state government, but primarily government of India, because it has the flexibility to accelerate the programs which were there, which were halted or slowed down by the pandemic. They have to revive. And it's not a magic thing. They have to be on the table. You have to start reviving them and accelerating them. So really, as far as the private sector is concerned, with low capacity utilization, I think it's really, I don't want to use the word, but having that investment for those kind of manufacturing. Of course, housing is a different matter. That's where the government comes in. And of course, tax incentive and issues like that. The second part, of course, is the consumer durable. And as I pointed out, the real shortfall is in consumer durables. Now, as the NBFC gentleman will tell you and others will tell you, these big ticket items are related to availability and cost of credit. So the issue really is, and I don't think there's a unanimity of opinion here, and if other members want to say what their views are, the question is, at this time, in H1 of FY21, what is the likely elasticity of demand with respect to interest for consumer durable? Good question. I don't think anybody has a simple answer, but if people have views, that would be good to hear. It depends. I think it could be, it should be positive. How important, people. With that, actually, what we could do now, Charan, is that perhaps the other members have noted the rest of the questions. If they want to answer any of those, then you can do another two, and we can then take three together. Yeah.
So should I invite them to speak now?
No. Yeah. If anybody has something in their mind, otherwise we'll select the three sets of questions together, and then they can answer.
Okay, so I will invite the three speakers. I'm requesting the speakers, please be very brief, because the panelists have things to respond to you also, and we'll give chance, of course, this will be the last. So I'm requesting the speakers to ask questions in a very brief manner. The first invite is for Mr. Tripathi Krishnanand. The second one is Dr. Vigneshwara Swamy. Third is Dr. Gautam Ray. And fourth is R.K. Anand. So please be brief in that sequence if you can quickly ask questions.
My question is to all the bankers in the panel, Professor Charan Singh, Upasana ji, Lashma ji. Central government will borrow 4 lakh crore rupees additional. Instead of 7.8 lakh crore, it will borrow 12 lakh crore rupees this year. And it has also asked states to borrow for GST compensation dues. That will put an extra burden of 1 lakh crore or 2 lakh crore rupees. So whether it will crowd out the space for private borrowing, this is my question. And second, in case of restructuring, banks are asking, this is related to ground realty, banks are asking for estimated salary and income after 2-year period of moratorium or restructuring. Suppose a restaurant owner who was doing 100 tables a day before COVID, how does he know that he will do 60, 70 or 50 tables after 2 years? This is one of the conditions. So could you please answer these two things? One is macroeconomic, one is microeconomic.
Dr. Vigneshwara Swamy, please be brief and quick.
Thank you very much, sir, for giving me the opportunity. Sir, my question to you is, you mentioned about the repo rate cut of around 50 basis points in your recommendations. Keeping in view the the lag effect of the monetary policy in India, which is considerably high. How do you think that this 50 basis points rate cut would infuse a great amount of growth or a take off of the loans from the banking sector? And also one important concern is that since our Indian banking is having the mix of both retail and corporate banking, many a times because of the improper or rather, if I have to be a little bit blunt, unethical way of passing on the interest rate cut benefits to the retail customers in this country. So this situation of banking, how is it going to help in the efficient policy transmission?
Now, Dr. Vignesh is from Hyderabad. The next person who is asking the question is Dr. Gautam Ray. He is from Indian Institute of Banking and Finance. Gautam Ray, please go ahead, but be brief and quick.
Yeah, good evening, sir. My question is that think tanks, they are saying that RBI really in the second half, coming second half. So what is the opinion of our shadow committee? And secondly, government is thinking that the recovery of economy would be a V shape. Whether it will be a V shape or U shape? I have only two questions, sir. Thank you.
The last question is from Mr. R.K. Anand. Mr. Anand, please go ahead.
Yeah, sir, as commented by RBI governor also, and we also see now with the unlocking of economy seems now to be troughed or near troughed, where their curve will be flattening and will remain for some time before taking the directional change. Now here at this point of time, CPI will get fueled by the increase in food and fuel prices because of the supply side disruptions and slightly better income in the hands of the people with the higher marginal propensity to consume. This increase in CPI may offset the benefits which we may draw from other components of the CPI. So inflation may make the directional change from here, that the curve may start looking up after some time, say 2 months around. In this scenario, if the inflation targeted is to be based on CPI only, and CPI doesn't leave room for the interest rate to be decreased further, interest rate can pause or may rise here proactively after some time, say 3 months, next quarter. So in this light, will this be a point to consider that the inflation targeting in India be made free from the CPI targeting and go back to the WPI?
Now, Mr. Agrawal ji, who had to speak right in the beginning, is going to make the concluding observations, and in that he is going to tell us some suggestions. So I would now request the chief with the questions that have already been raised, and we will, at the concluding session, Mr. Agrawal will give his observations as well as thank everybody.
Yeah, so I think let's go in reverse order now. Charan, you want to answer any of the questions which were asked to you?
Yeah, I'm very clear on this 50 basis point. There are a couple of things that I have in mind when I say the 50 basis. The first thing is that the banks will have to transmit according to the new formula. How much will get transmitted, I'm not very sure because there is a formula there, but something will get transmitted. The second thing when I say 50 basis point is the signaling that we want to give to the market that we are accommodated. The third issue that I have in mind, and that links up with what Mr. Anand also said, the time has come when we will have to call inflation targeting a pause button and say the priority is very clear. The priority is growth, growth, and growth. That is why I'm suggesting a substantial cut in the rate so that message is loud and clear and says that the Reserve Bank has shifted its total focus on growth and revival of the economy. For the two questions, thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank ASSOCHAM for giving me the.
Subhashji,
Yeah.
Mr. Agarwal, just few comments quickly. Upasana, please, you want to say something?
Please.
No, I will take that question which was asked on borrowing. Is the private borrowing getting crowded out by the excess government borrowing? I think there was a question on that. So just one thing to clarify, right now, the banking sector has adequate amount of liquidity with them for two reasons. One is there is a structural liquidity, which is credit growth and deposit growth. Deposit growth is in near double digits and credit growth is extremely muted, which we already know. So given that kind of a divergence, the banking system has enough liquidity. And to add to that, of course, RBI is also taking measures to ensure that liquidity is adequate. Given that kind of an environment with muted credit requirement, you would not see crowding out in this kind of an environment. In fact, if you see what the banks are holding, the SLR actual versus what is required, the the SLR securities that they're investing in, it's nearly 29% of NDTL. So this is not almost 10% extra they're holding. So they're already investing in GSEC. So there is no crowding out at this point in time, purely because of lack of options. But this problem of crowding out happens only when the credit demand is there and there is excess government borrowing.
Thank you. And Indran, would you like to say something? You're still there?
No, I'm good. We can.
Okay. And Ashima?
I would just to make a few remarks, not to the specific question as such, but I think it is really the government has to come out with some fiscal stimulus in the current situation, and the Reserve Bank has to support government borrowing, whether it is through OMOs or through monetization, because so far, as Upasana was saying, there's excess liquidity to accommodate the borrowing requirement without it affecting interest rates. GSEC rates have come down. Generally, interest rates have been coming down in the market. But in the future, so when somebody says calendar and so on, or, because there's so much uncertainty with this virus, you don't know what is the amount required and so on. But the communication is very, very important to say that we will be supportive, to say that you will reverse accommodation if inflation is high, is just not on. I think with Sharon there has to be a long-term, however long growth is below normal, we are supporting growth. That sort of thing should go on. And there were a series of questions on savers being shortchanged. So I would like to make a few points here that, first of all, this inflation spike is short-term. We all agree that in the long term it will come down because demand is slack, and a lot of government action is being taken on the supply side. So the negative real interests for savers are very temporary, right? You have to be forward-looking in that respect also. Then savers have to now move to a diversified portfolio where they take risk on the economy growth also, go to mutual funds and so on, apart from deposits. Third, I think there is an element of money illusion here because we're so used to high nominal interest rates, but those accompanied high inflation. In the long-term inflation expectations, there's some evidence that it's anchored, and that is why I think inflation targeting in the path guidance is important. Even if you don't cut interest rates today, as long as you're on the accommodative path, you know they will be cut in the future. So firms take action based on that. So that guidance is very, very important. And finally, because of the distortions of the Indian system, this gap between the interest rate firms face and consumers face, I think this dual interest rate policy, already we are seeing the Reserve Bank do some of this. When they reverse repo is supporting banks, and banks should be passing this on to depositors in higher rates. And somebody said unethical practices. I think this should be tightened. Similarly, TLTRO be conditional on passing on in lower loan rates so that gaps are too high in the Indian context. So we need this sort of thing to be clarified and more lower rates be passed on to borrowers and higher rates to depositors. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Finally, just two important points, I think. I think one of the problems we have is a lack of imagination. When the Federal Reserve has changed its policy, has tweaked it to say that we will have an average focused because this is an unprecedented event. What I fail to see is why we are unable to think of it as an unprecedented event and try to, I'm not X or Y policy, but I don't see any use of imagination or understanding in coming from the official, the MPC. Okay, let's be very specific. That this is so. And on top of that, they are going in the reverse direction. The monetary policy is supposed to be the future, not the current. The current mistake can easily be justified by the lockdown, which was not expected. And therefore, the supply chain disruptions which lead to this 6% food or whatever, 9-10% food, in addition to the usual ones, it seems to me that's really the important issue. It is not that one is saying violate those conditions, but those conditions have to be adjusted at least for the pandemic. And that is what I don't understand. The second point I'd like to make very briefly on the growth. You know, I was asked this question by a news magazine well, firstly, of course, the forecasts are, you know, ranging from, let's say, minus 2.5 to minus 10 for the whole year. And the question I was asked is, what is your forecast? And whether it will be U, V, K, W, and a whole string of words. I said my forecast, which is relatively optimistic, is minus 5%, plus minus 2.5%. But the shape of the recovery, I feel, is an elephant-shaped recovery. And I meant that part humorously, because the implication was we are all like that fable of the blind men of Hindustan. We are just looking at these little parts, and it's really a huge elephant. It's a pandemic, okay? And so it's all in the air. If we catch hold of a tail, we say one thing, if we see the trunk. Anyway, that's supposed to be humorous. It's not a serious comment. But with that, let me turn it over to Mr. Subhash Agarwal for his concluding comments.
Thank you. First of all, good evening. First of all, I would like to thank ASSOCHAM and eGrow Foundation for giving me this opportunity to propose a vote of thanks. I think the wonderful discussion, and all speakers are having great knowledge about the subject right from the beginning. Dr. Asima Goel, Dr. Charan Singh, and Dr. Sri Indranil Sen Gupta, Ms. Upasana Bhardwaj, and Dr. Arvind Varmani spoke very, very well. They cleared the subject thoroughly. They have taken the questions and answered the audience very good. And Dr. Arvind Varmani is the session chairman. He is chairman eGrow Foundation and former chief economic advisor Government of India. So we want to say thanks to you, sir. You have spared your valuable time and give your valuable suggestions. And it is a wonderful session you have chaired. As usual, Dr. Charan Singh, who is very clear in the subject, in the thought, he said that 50 paisa basic cut should be there and RBI should focus on growth. Inflation should not be the priority. That is very loud and clear, and I think this time it is needed because the economy is going to contract more than 7%. As discussed, it can be minus 10%, it can be 5%, but definitely negative growth. So to revive growth, to revive economy, RBI should take abnormal steps. They should not keep range bound from 4% plus minus 2% inflation. And that committee, Urjit Patel committee, they formed in the year 2014. So in this unusual time, this is, I think, they should ignore it and keep focus in mind to revive the economy. That is bigger role. So Dr. Charan Singh has said very, very clearly that this 50 basis points should be reduced, or RBI monitoring committee should give focus on this growth as a sole object. I think Dr. Raman Agrawal from FIDC, he has said so many things from NBFC side, as ECL is there and sufficient NPA provision is always made by NBFC. Then there is no need of special provision of 10% for COVID. So that is, they should keep in mind that additional provision is not required. And RBI, which they have allowed all their loan for 6 months to 18 months, which is very short. And usually NBFC lend for 3 years. So he has pointed out very good point that this lending should be more than 2-3 years. And all panelists has discussed, has guided very well, and all has said that this interest rate should be reduced by 15 basis point to 50 basis point, and that economy which is facing abnormal situation due to COVID, and I think there should be a long duration program, not for 1 year, because I think growth should be taken in 2-3 years. It will take time. So to achieve that normal growth, our accommodative stance policy should remain intact, and they should clear for 3-4 years that this policy will remain intact, and whatever is needed, they will take necessary steps. So I would like to thank all panelists. I would like to thank the audience who are connected so far and given and raised questions and remain active. Keep this seminar very, very active. So thank you very much to all the panelists, all the viewers, and to ASSOCHAM and eGrow Foundation. Thank you very much once again. And that's all.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
I must thank ASSOCHAM, must thank Dr. Virmani, our chairman of eGrow, and the chairman of the Shadow eGrow Monetary Policy. I think we have had a very good discussion. Though humorously, Dr. Virmani says the elephant type. I don't know if they agree. I always thought a W would be a better is the comparison that I do, because if there's a relapse, probably the W is what is going to happen. As far as the, I totally agree with Dr. Virmani. It's once in a century event. The Fed Reserve has made drastic changes. Even the IMF in Washington is re-looking at their monetary models. They've set up a special unit to look at the monetary policy. And I think we in the country also need to look. We are a leading emerging country and poised for bigger things. You know, the question that was raised on crowding out, I would like to simply add to what Madam Upasana said. I would say in times which are so uncertain, the government should borrow and start the investment cycle. The private sector would then follow suit. If you expect after this super uncertain time, the private sector to take the lead, that's going to be a challenge. So I think the government should be allowed to go in and borrow in a big way. I'm not worried about the deficit as an economist. That's my view. They should borrow in a big way, start investing, and the private sector will follow suit. I think that's the strategy we would follow. With this, let me once again thank each one of you. Firstly, the members of the Shadow Monetary Policy to spare time in busy times and come and present their views, and to the participants who have sat with us for nearly 2 hours to enrich this discussion. This will be available on the website of ASSOCHAM as well as shortly after, and I hope you will be able to use it at different places. The last point I want to make is eGrow Foundation is organizing on Northeast a discussion on Friday evening, September 25, from 5:30 to 6:30. And we'll have a series of discussions after that on Northeast. And on 26th September, eGrow is organizing a discussion on the 3 agro bills by the government. And we have expert panelists in both the discussions on Northeast as well as the 3 agro bills. I would like to invite you to look into this and participate in the discussions. I'll send you an invite to all these events. Thank you once again for being with us. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.